There's lots of ways things can unfortunately go wrong. It's very clear that when you are gifted, that the challenges you have make particularly academic success very hard. And it's not just academic success, like career success after you're done with your academic work is still also in question. So what are the main things that we see? Well, the first one is something I call the learning wall. Right? So when you're in as early as kindergarten, we can see gifted kids develop really bad metacognition skills. And these metacognition skills, so the ability to learn, often follow sometimes really well-willing and positive reinforcement from teachers, particularly if the focus is on the result, right? So if a gifted kid as young as 2 years old walks up to a teacher in the kindergarten and says, like, look, I did finish this, and then they get like, oh, well done, you're so fast, you're so quick. And a lot of parents will compare kids like this to others and say, oh, he's so smart. And it builds up this massive ego for them where they go, oh yeah, like that's great. If I do this quick, or I basically study for it a bit, I get a high reward. Great, let's go. But what often happens is they only have to read something once or twice to really understand it well, or they can deduce where things are going quite quickly. So they don't have to read things. They don't have to run into issues that they don't understand. They're the first to answer a question in class, and they get the recognition for that as well. And another thing that they tend to run in as they get older is that when they don't study for an exam and they still get a good grade, a lot of their peers say, oh, that's good. You're so clever. You're so smart. It's very ego boosting. But by the time you get to your exams and you have to sort of combine everything you've learned before, this sort of strategy where you don't study until the last moment really comes back to bite you. And we see a lot of gifted kids disengage at that point. And disengagement can look very different to different kids. A good framework that I like to use is from Betts and Nyhart, where you either have kids that overcompensate socially when they're not doing well, or undercompensate. And what that means is that if they overadjust, overcompensate socially, they are the more like ones that sort of hide their pain and frustration inside. So they'll look great face value, but their frustration, their fear is internal. And unfortunately, this is more common with the girls. We see a lot of self-harming, things like that actually get, like, I work with hundreds of kids right now, and the percentage of self-harming girls is unfortunately way too high. On the other side of that spectrum, you have the ones that underadjust, so they don't want to listen. They get really upset. They start walking around in class. They start challenging the teacher. Often, when you look online and you see these kind of funny answers that are technically answering the question, but obviously missing the spirit of the question being asked, a lot of those answers are gifted kids that purposely answer this way to show the teacher that they understand more than the teacher even does. And like that spectrum can go both ways, but it's most of those kids will underperform against what they potentially could do if they would feel more seen, or whether if they actually would be challenged more. Now, the other challenges that they have relate to what we call asynchronous social development. A lot of gifted kids tend to have big understandings of concepts early on. You see that a lot of them, they like dinosaurs, but like really intensely, or they like to know more about the universe than they know a lot. And it's hard for them often to find kids in their age group that also like these things. So what they do is they tend to drift towards older kids or even adults to, share their knowledge or find out more, because that's fun. And that seems like a good thing, but what it does, it makes them skip certain social stages. In, again, kindergarten, this is again as early as kindergarten, but it could be at any time of their life. If you are in kindergarten, like, you have to learn how to share and not take things without asking. There's a certain kind of developmental stage that is very important there. And gifted kids skip these kind of stages because they either understand it quicker, so they don't deal with that social or that emotional frustration. and therefore don't know how to deal with it when it happens to them. So they sort of become ostracized from their peers. And then another thing that is really problematic for a lot of gifted kids is that because of the way that their brains function and a lot of stimuli tend to go a lot quicker, which is often a good thing if you want to learn stuff, if you want to take information, but it's really frustrating if it deals with emotion, because emotional stimuli have a bigger impact on gifted kids. So they feel it more intense. So if they're angry, they're more angry. If they're sad, they're more sad. And we see this a lot with parents with gifted kids that say, oh yeah, like when we talk about something sad, they seem completely distraught. Like, why? Like, why are they so go from so happy to so sad so quickly? They seem to twist on a dime. And the way that I explain this to a lot of parents and the kids that I work with is that basically what is happening is you're more susceptible to this particular trigger, so you feel it more, but also you're better at avoiding the situations where these things happen, right? So if you're quite logically strong and you're very good at vocalizing what things you want, you don't sit in that state of emotional distress. And again, we see this with babies. So a gifted baby might be able to ask for milk earlier than a non-gifted child. And you could go, oh, that's great. They can ask for milk. But one big thing about being a baby and crying for things is that babies learn how to self-soothe. And every time a baby is in distress, parents will come and sort that out. But there is a time that they're crying. And that getting upset and then calming down basically teaches them to deal with that emotion. And a lot of gifted kids skip that. So they were easy babies initially, and then they've become really difficult toddlers when it comes to emotions, maybe, or even very difficult teens, particularly when they get to, to puberty and all the emotions start bringing up. So that's another big thing, that if you don't help them recognize and deal with, can create like really the kids with a lot of anxiety and frustration. Or, I mean, we as a society don't really like to deal with people that are not in control of their emotions. This is with adults as well. So and we praise people that are in control of their emotions. So when you have kids that basically don't get enough practice controlling their emotions, they can often become a bit of an outcast socially, and that becomes like a negative spiral for them. So that's a very big challenge that we have to deal with. Similarly, they're much more susceptible to how procrastination triggers work. So procrastination isn't people being lazy. That's a very old-fashioned way of looking at people not doing the work they're supposed to do. The way we work with kids that are procrastinating is that it's actually a fear response. It's very deeply rooted in how our survival instinct works and how delayed gratification works as a human being. Basically, our brains are always trying to judge any situation as something that is either beneficial for survival or not. And if it's beneficial and the impact of it is noticeable at some point in the future, that gives dopamine. And that's sort of what we're addicted to. Now, a lot of things can give dopamine. It could be your phone, it could be things, but we know that if something is very important, if you can get a few $1,000 for a half hour worth of work, it's a lot easier to do it because we're going to get a massive dopamine hit from that delayed gratification. Now, that judgment is very hard to make. And whenever our brain feels, ooh, I'm doing something that is not going to give me that satisfaction in the future, it starts a fight or flight response. And that fear or anger or anxiety is much more amplified with gifted kids. And basically, as an adult, you probably have done things subconsciously before where you went like, oh, that's weird. Why did I open the fridge? Like, how did I, like, you were working, particularly during COVID, probably you were working at home and all of a sudden the fridge was open, or you walked into a room and said, I'm not sure why I'm here. Or you subconsciously grabbed your phone to just look at it. These are very complex actions that you take and without thinking. And all of that is much more amplified in gifted kids. So that's another big thing that we need to work on. And then finally, I think it's often for gifted kids very hard to find individuals that can keep up with them. So when I work with kids that feel very lonely and like excluded, they often blame themselves because they get a lot of good advice, well-willing advice from people around them. Like, oh, you just have to ask more questions and you just have to listen to people more. And all that is true, like they should. But it is very frustrating if you understand quantum physics and you have to talk to somebody and that doesn't understand quantum physics at all, or has like a very simple, basic understanding of it. And you can never really be yourself. And I find a lot of gifted kids, they will say, oh, I don't want to be in these social situations because it costs me so much energy. And when we work with gifted kids and we create a peer group for them, you can see that they go, oh, here's some other kids that can keep up with me or that can actually push back or know more than me. And that creates deep bond. So that's the final thing that we have to look at.